everyone getting their voice set up? Talking a little bit here so you can do an adjustment. Boy, all my group sessions are taking a while to get started. All right, 11:04. Ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, awesome.
Are you going to make an introduction, or should I just
I am.
start?
I'm getting right to it here. I got busy sending out those notices. Hey everybody, welcome to ReLam. This is the talk series about relocatable laboratories in the metaverse. And today we have with us Crista Lopez, also known as Diva Canto in Second Life. Crista is an associate professor at UC Irvine, and she wants to give us some information. She's going to talk to us today about the Hypergrid, which is an architecture for a new type of web. It's a way to make virtual worlds interoperable with each other and the web. We're talking about seamless transfer of user agents between grids that are operated by different entities. Diva is a singer, a pianist, a leading researcher at the forefront of virtual world technology, and please join me in welcoming her to ReLam here at the Cura Dome. Thanks, Diva, and take it away.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know you had pulled out my parallel life as a singer, but that's...
Oh, yeah. I saw your name and I thought, I wonder if she's a singer. Go ahead. Yes. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I mean, this is great. So just so that I have my meta processes in place. So the idea is that I talk for about 15 minutes and then we take it out to Q&A. Is that the plan?
Yes, exactly. You've got the floor for 15, 20 minutes, you know, at the very least. If you'd like to talk longer, that's fine. And then we'll open it to the floor for comments and discussions. And we'll certainly wrap on the hour, if not before. So that's the general format, and you can work with that as you like.
Okay, very good. So let me start by talking about a little bit of the context of the Hypergrid, where it came from and where it's being developed. The Hypergrid is being developed in the context of OpenSim, which I'm sure most of you may know or may have heard. It's this open source server side that operates with a number of clients, including the standard Second Life client. So when you connect to OpenSim worlds, it feels very much like you're connecting to Second Life, because the interface that you have is exactly the same when you connect with the Second Life client. But the backend server side is completely different. It's basically a bunch of people that got together and just decided to design a server that can understand the messages that this client sends out. So the OpenSim project is very, very interesting, very exciting, lots of energy going on in there. And there's a lot of experimentation going on in there, because lots of people have been talking about for several years about, ideas that have different names, the 3D web, or, the virtual worlds, the web virtual worlds and things like that, or connecting the current web into 3D content. And so there's a lot of general ideas that have been going on, and that a lot of people are sort of moving towards. what I saw in OpenSim was a really exciting opportunity to actually experiment for real, and by experiment I mean by doing it. And so it has been sort of the way that OpenSim works, there's a lot of trial and error. So we first do it, and then we figure out that it's not completely right, so we do it again. And that has been working for me. It's like that's the way that I like to work. I don't like to have these very long times of design, and then you go for a very long time without doing anything, and then finally 6 months later you do something, and then it's always the case that what you designed is not exactly the right thing. So it's very slow. I like very much this style of development, that it's very iterative and very fast. So that's the context of the Hypergrid. So when I started interacting with the OpenSim project, the OpenSim project was a server side for the Linden client, but it was still designed for the sort of the model of the grid, like the Linden Lab grid, which is a relatively closed grid. There is no, you go from one, yes, you could set up a grid with OpenSim, but there would be no interoperability between that grid and the other grid that would set up in another machine. So when I decided, I was thinking about these things, about how to make a web of virtual worlds, and one of the things that sort of, the very first basic thing is like the concept of an hyperlink. What the heck is an hyperlink in virtual worlds? What could an hyperlink be? The hyperlinks didn't exist, so we had to make them up, and there are many different ways of making hyperlinks. So one possible way that I thought of is this idea of having the same concept of a hypertext link, which is what exists on the web, but for virtual worlds. And basically, you can look at the map or the geography of a virtual world as a set of links. Each simulator being a machine that has content, and so the map sort of links all those simulators together, as if you had a web page that has many links to different websites. So that's sort of where these ideas came from. You look at the map as if it was a web page, and so what you put in there are hyperlinks to other worlds. It could be the same world, but it could be also other worlds. And so I've been told that I couldn't use PowerPoint, so what I did, I cannot just talk without illustrating what I have in my mind. So just above my head, if you zoom in and see above me, there is an illustration of this idea, the hypergrid, and I don't know if everybody's seeing it, but basically what you see in there is the three planes over there. So the three planes, each plane represents a map, so a virtual world that is each one is under the control of a different organization. So you have, for example, on the bottom one is OS Grid, for example. Then the middle one is the UCI grid, and then the top one is some home worlds that somebody can have. So the idea is that in these maps you can put regions in there that actually are representations of other worlds. That's what these tubes represent. These are the hyperlinks, the things that you flow through, and once you teleport to that position on the map, you actually teleport into a different dimension. If you care to think about sort of physics concepts here, astrophysics concepts here. And I don't know if I'm going to, I know there are lots of astrophysics here in this organization, so I'm probably going to offend a gazillion people here because I don't know much about astrophysics. But the idea would be this, that there's a multi-dimensional space with these links in between. And when you go to certain positions of your own space, that is basically a redirection to a position of this other space. So that's what the hyperlinks represent in the hypergrid. So the hypergrid is this structure that you see here with links between the different organizations. So that's sort of the basic idea, but that's not the whole story. That allows you to Yeah, it's right now I have the size. The question is if the link size was a whole region or it's just a piece of the region. Right now I have it as a whole region, so the granularity is at the region level. Yes. There's also, so basically I'm trying to make an equivalent of hypertext links into a geography semantics. That's what's going on in here, and you have all the same things. So that's the idea. So now you have this, and now you have the possibility of traveling between worlds that are controlled by different organizations. So the question is, if I define my own grid, that this grid space is really this region on another grid, yes. So that's the semantics. The other grid has the opportunity to deny those links because there's a request in there that's going on. You know, there's all sorts of access control layer that I will talk about a little bit later. But so given, let me proceed, and then I will answer more questions about this. Given that now we have this ability to travel between worlds, sorry, no problem. Well, let me just explain sort of an overall story, and then I will engage in all these questions because those are the interesting details. You have this opportunity to travel between worlds, but that's not the whole story, because now, you know, there's all sorts of cans of worms that open up if you do that, right? So that's the other part of this picture that you have here. Now, besides, you see these three planes connected by these hyperlinks, but there's another object in here on the left side of the stage that has a basically this flat screen that represents the client. That's the viewer, the second life client, and the client the client basically has these avatars, which is this little straw man over there. The white straw man is the avatar representation. And these avatars, as you know here, we have access to our inventory, we have access to this voice service that I'm using right now, to IAM, to a bunch of services, right? And so far, those services have been designed to be tightly coupled to each world. So each world here on this hypergrid would have, the idea would be that each world would have these sets of services, and they are meant, really, they have been designed so far to work only for the regions that inside that world, not between the worlds. So what happens if you just do this, very simple way, sorry, very simple way of transporting people between the worlds is that you open up, worms of security holes that go with those flashy little links over there. Because what that means is that we're adapting a model that has been designed for a trusted organization, so basically a collection of services that were assumed to be trusted. All simulators in the grid are supposed to be trusted, and they all trust the services that serve that grid. And now suddenly you open that up, and all sorts of horrible things can happen. So basically, the mechanism for making avatars travel between worlds is very simple to do. The thing that is interesting and difficult is the how do you address the security problems that come with that, and that's what I'm going to talk about next. That's the interesting stuff. So. What we are doing now, and what I am doing right now at the OpenSim level, is that we very clear came to the conclusion that we need a good model for what's going on in here, and I can give you a link to the model. Hold on just a second. This is basically the working model that I'm going with. You don't need to read it right now, but basically it's basically a model that will enable a secure way of traveling through these worlds. The idea is that we need to make some changes. Very clear that the current Linden viewer is not designed for this open world. So there needs to be changes on the client side. And in fact, the client becomes a lot more important on the user's access to the services. And that's what that orange box over there, I don't know if you see the orange box, but that's supposed to represent all the user services, all the services that I'm using, like the voice, IM, my social network, my storage inventory, all that stuff, that currently, in the current design, that is attached, associated with the grid and with a bunch of user accounts. The idea is that those services are not dissociated from grid, so they exist out there, and the client can connect to them and preserves those connections throughout the session of the user. And so basically the grid, the regions themselves are completely out of the loop. All the interactions to my storage go directly from my client to that storage. All the interactions to my instant messaging go directly from my client to that instant messaging. And then when I want, I'm in a world and then I want to, for example, rest something from my inventory to that world, then there's a series of steps that happen that particular region gets access to that particular object on my inventory, and that there's a transfer that happens in there. But that's only that one particular object, not the entirety of my inventory. So that allows basically for a safe interoperation between worlds and user services, and the mediation of that security is done through the client, which is the very trusted component that the user is using. So that's sort of the very high level description of what's going on and what the hypergrid is and where it is going. So right now, what we have in OpenSIM is only the first phase, which is those links over there with basically no security. Yes, you can transfer inventory. You can you can use user services, but in a very insecure manner. You basically assume that everyone is trusted, and you obviously cannot do that. So what I'm doing right now as we speak is working on the protocol that will allow the hypergrid to be secure. And that includes changes in the client side too. So yeah, that's sort of the main idea. That's basically the main idea. So I would be very happy now to just take questions and go dive into some of these details.
Would you like to take some questions now from folks?
Sure.
Okay, great. Y'all have any questions? Let's see, let's scroll back through the text. I think some were getting asked while you were starting.
One question I would have is, can the user choose to go to another grid even if there's not a link in the grid you're in? That is, I want to log into a grid other than the grid where I created my account. Can I just do that?
Yes, absolutely, yes. I'm hearing echo. Okay, so there's many ways of doing that. Let's see. Let's start with the login. There's the login phase, and then there's, after the login phase, the navigation phase. So the login phase, when you log in, the idea now with the new hypergrid, with changes to the client, is that you log in to your user identity service, and in the process you also specify which world you want to land on. So that's a given. In the login process itself, you specify two things. You specify your identity, and that's going to be verified. You have to enter your password to verify that identity with that identity server. And the other thing that you specify is where do you want to land. And it can be any grid. So that's the login process. The other thing, which is after you are logged in, and then how can you navigate, and can you only go through the links that are provided to you? And the answer is no. Just like a browser on the web has the address bar, you can also go to any address, any world that you may know directly the link to. You can just type it in many different possible ways, and you can be transported there. So it's just like on the web, there will be a mixture. In fact, it may turn out that these direct jumps are more interesting than the links that are provided by the world itself. Just like on the web, you have pages that have links, but you can also ignore those links and just jump directly to things, or use, for example, search engines to go to other places. That's exactly the same thing that is going on here.
I've also abused the moderator's privilege here to ask a question. So, as I understand it, you're talking about connected grids, all of which are using Linden Lab/OpenSim standards and protocols. But one subject that often comes in our discussions here is the interoperability of these virtual worlds with the informational content of the web. Could you envision architecture whereby one of your layers is the web?
Yes, absolutely. Well, you were asking the heavy question right in the beginning of this session of Q&A. I was leaving that to the end. In fact, what I'm seeing in this architecture is something much more generic than just virtual worlds. In fact, the fact that we have a 3D virtual world in here is almost just just a detail. You could imagine that this is really a virtual world that does not have 3D. It could be Bank of America, or it could be something, just a website. And this architecture that is emerging in here is an architecture on top of what already exists on the web that has also the idea of user as the first-class concept, and the idea of user services as a first-class concept, which is something that people are trying to sort of hack it, on top of the web. It's kind of difficult. But the idea is if you have a client that's a little smarter than a web browser, you can keep state and you can keep your identity throughout the navigation period. So I don't know if that was your question, but basically that's one of the most interesting things that I see in here, is that this could actually be an architecture for the web too, not just for virtual worlds. But I think that your question was a little bit more, there's another version of your question that I can also answer, which is interoperability with tools and things that are going on out there on the web. And yeah, OpenSim is very much on that page. We want to reuse protocols that are de facto standards out there. There's a lot of interest on the OpenSim community to use things like OpenID, although I have a lot of reservations about it. But things like WebDAV for asset transfers, stuff that's already been thought of for the web, and we will want to reuse all of that. Yeah. In fact, all of these protocols that we are using in OpenSim have been we have been transforming them all into HTTP REST, which is a sort of a very well-known and very solid standard of designing interfaces on the web. So this will be all very easy to access from other third-party tools.
Well, that's excellent. And I was...
sorry, go ahead, George.
Yeah, I was struck in your presentation with similarities of the questions we're asking in the context of web services for data access and so on, including all of the graduated security and stuff like that. So that there is clearly a lot of underlying architectural and methodological parallelism here.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
You brought up the topic of assets, and Harleywood brought up a question asking for your comments and thoughts about properties of objects and transfer of inventory across grids. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Right. So let's see. So the current working model, which it may change in the future, but the idea is that content creators will be, so first of all, the idea is that yes, there will be possibility of exchanging assets between different worlds. There's no question about it. That's absolutely fundamental. And that can be done in a number of ways. One of them through the user's inventory. So the user has something in the inventory, and that belongs to the user, not to any grid in particular. And the user can just res those objects or those assets in whatever world he or she is. Yeah, I'm hearing an echo too. Okay, so that's one possibility. The idea for permissions is that there would probably have to be another, a richer language of permissions that you attach to the object. So what what the current Linden viewer has is sort of a subset of what we are envisioning for the properties of the objects. So, for example, there might be a flag that says whether an asset can be, whether an asset that's already in world can be transferred to another world or not, or whether you want to restrict its existence only to that particular world. So that could be all, properties that you could attach to objects.
Did you see Prospero's follow-on question to that?
I didn't see Caledonia. I think you have to moderate me because I'm not very good at tracking those things.
Yeah. So Prospero
I was just basically saying...
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, you asked.
Oh, I was just saying, so you're talking about, you have your assets, and presumably your account is with some, and I'll go ahead and use the Linden language, agent domain, or whatever you want to call it. Whoever it is where your assets live may refuse to res assets in certain worlds in the future security model, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So the way that I see this is that first we need to have the very, very open and very permissive mechanisms in place, and those are the enablers. And then we have a security model on top, which is basically access control and things like that, that restrict, what the mechanism can do. And that's how the web works too.
Yes, but to have truly interoperable VR, immersive VR and the web, you do have to standardize so that everything is resed everywhere in the same fashion.
Right. So right. So this is assuming that there are these standard protocols for doing this. That's what we're kind of experimenting here with OpenSim. That there will be these standard protocols for example, resing things into the world. Yeah. The particularities of those protocols are still being devised right now. In fact, there are different ideas that are floating around, and the approach to OpenSim is that we want to see all those ideas come to life and sort of compare them, see how they work. So the question for B. Ewing is whether you can take the avatar exactly as it is and port it to another virtual world, and the answer is absolutely yes. Unless, of course, the user service where you host your avatar appearance doesn't allow you to port your appearance to another world. But if it does, then that's already working on the Hypergrid. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. Where can we go do this? Which other grids support this?
So any OpenSim-based world can support this. The Hypergrid right now is just a configuration flag. You just put it on. There's this configuration, that you put in the configuration file. Hypergrid equals true, and bang, you enable all of this stuff. No, Second Life doesn't interact with this at all.
Okay, so this is purely between OpenSim grids.
Right now, this is purely going on in OpenSim-based worlds. There's something you have to take into account with Second Life in that it's a world that exists and has a whole lot of stuff that people do not necessarily want to have transferred over. Meaning Second Life will not be able to connect to other grids until there's a protocol with with the security in place that will allow things like no copy and no transfer assets to somehow be taken into account. So since Hypergrid doesn't do that right now, if Second Life were to connect to Hypergrid, many residents would storm San Francisco and burn the entire place down.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so Linden Lab is in a position right now that have, hundreds of thousands of users and terabytes of content, and people are making money, and it's connected to real world currency and whatnot. So they have a lot of constraints. They cannot experiment as much as OpenSim can, as it is an advantage. So once we figure out the security model for the Hypergrid, then maybe Second Life will be interested in applying it too. I don't know. but there's that, even for the OpenSIM Hypergrid, it's pretty clear that in order for this to work, it needs a security model in place, a very good one, a very solid one. And in fact, better than the one that the Linden Lab has, because it accounts for all this openness. And of course, with openness, you also want protection. So we need to account for that.
Yes, but the deeper underlying question here is whether this very structure of the Second Life in OpenSIM, thus the hypergrid, scales up to the level of the web, or whether one has to design a whole new set of protocols and standards and so on, and then worry about translating these pioneering but already obsolete software constructs into that new system. The way I see it, there's a significant portion of the protocols that you can just simply reuse what's already out there. So the protocols, if you look at my objects over here, the protocols between the client and the user services, you can just reuse that stuff. Lots of stuff already going on, how to talk to storage services and all that stuff. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Stuff like instant messaging systems, you can just connect, or even social networking stuff, you can just connect all that stuff. There's a new piece of ideas, a new collection of ideas that has to do with agent transfers in this kind of model. And that is actually a lot more interesting, and that is new, and that doesn't exist on the web because the web doesn't have this concept of user as a first-class concept. And that, I think, is where the new things will be, the new contribution, in a way, of virtual worlds to the general webs in general. So I can go talk a little bit more about that if you want, a little bit more in detail about how this idea is. So let me explain to you how this works, how teleports work, okay. Both in Second Life and in OpenSIM. Teleports are, which I call, agent transfers in general. When you go from one region to another, there is direct communication between the departing region and the receiving region, exchanging the details of that agent that is being transferred. So it tells the identity of that agent. It sends about all the the attachments and all that stuff. So that's how it works. There's direct application server to application server communication, exchanging this information. Now this only works when there is a trust relation between these two application servers. Because if there is no trust relation between these two application servers, then what will happen is basically identity theft galore, right? You have one application server saying, "Hey, here comes Barack Obama," and launches an agent at the other one pretending to be Barack Obama or whatever. This obviously does not work doesn't work like that. So, the way that this is going to work on the hypergrid is that agent transfers, teleports between untrusted application servers are actually performed by the client, not by the region servers, but by the client. So the client is the ultimate trust entity in here. So it's the client that says, okay, the person wants to teleport from where he is now to another region. So I, the client, am going to launch an agent to that other region, and I am providing all the credentials for this user that the other region can then verify in a safe manner. And so that's how you address the issues of trust. So these agent transfers is something that is very unique, I think, between that we are sort of adding here to the mix of web science, if you want to call it like that. But for everything else, for the other protocols, service access, IAMs, storage, all that stuff, you can just reuse a bunch of things that have been done already.
Did you, I don't know if you have your text box open. Prospero was asking about MemoX and the IBM Linden protocol, and how does that compare to Hypergrid? Will they come together? Are they competing?
Right. So that's a great question. So let me address to the best of my knowledge, and I must confess that I don't know much about OGP because there haven't been that many details about it. So OGP is an Open Grid protocol, and it's a protocol that is being spearheaded by Linden Lab and IBM. with this basically the same purpose. The purpose being that you can have different worlds controlled by different organizations, and you can have exchange of agents between those worlds. As far as the general idea is the same, obviously. The details, as far as I know, which is not, a lot of details are missing from the descriptions, but as far as I understand OGP, a part of it is similar to the Hypergrid. So in particular, the part of accessing the services directly from the client. Things like storage, for example, inventory, those will be accessed directly from the client. That seems to be the same with the Hypergrid. The thing that seems to be different, as far as I know, is, again, the agent transfers. So the agent transfers in OGP happen still by the regions. So the regions are the ones that pass the agents along to other regions. And that necessarily implies that, again, a trust relation between the worlds, and from what I understand, from what they're envisioning OGP to be, is those trust relations will be set up between very big companies. So, for example, you set up a trust relation between Linden Lab and IBM, for example, and that involves lawyers and signing contracts saying that you will not do harm, for example. So at the technical level, you address the trust issues. You basically don't address the trust issues at the technical level. You basically avoid them by signing contracts. That's, as far as I know, that's the main difference between the Hypergrid and OGP. But again, I don't know much of the details of OGP, and people may just come and say that this is not how OGP is being designed, but that's how I'll perceive it. Yes. Agent. So what do I mean by agent? An agent is a representation of a user within an application server. That's a very technical answer. So the web also has the concept of user agents. It's about the same thing. It's a data structure that represents the user, and the data structure, it may have an appearance, and that appearance is your avatar, or it may not have an appearance. And you can have virtual worlds without avatars.
But one should expand on this a little bit, because there are, web crawlers, there are all kinds of software agents that are already deployed in the web world, and we're going to see a lot more of that. And Matthew Graham in our group has had some interesting ideas about fusion of intelligent agents and avatars in the future 3D web. But it does remind me of exact problems that we're dealing with originally Grid and now web services, that you essentially sent a little package of code and or data somewhere, and has to unpack itself and do its thing and send your results back. And so the issues of trust are very, very similar.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly my point. I mean, there's this much deeper point, which I'm not sure that many people see it besides me, who have been thinking about this for a long time. There's a much deeper point of trust and, user-based services that is not specific to just virtual worlds. It's much more general than that. It's virtual worlds without 3D. Okay, it's the web, basically. It's the web as it is. And so what I'm hoping is that this model that we're experimenting here with OpenSim actually flows back to a lot of what's going on the web too. And if you look at these definitions that I have here, let me put it back again. If you look at those definitions that you have here, and if you replace the term simulator with application server, you get the exact same model, but much more generic. It can be any application server. It doesn't need to be a 3D simulator.
Have you talked, this is probably an extremely premature question, but have you talked to anything like the W3C standards body or to Apache or anything about trying to take some of these concepts back to web servers? Or are you still just working entirely with an OpenSim?
Yeah, I haven't, because but I will plan to do that when the security model is actually working, because you can have lots of wonderful ideas, but if you don't have a serious security model, none of this will work. So I want to prove myself that it's possible to secure something like this. And once that is in place, I just happen to have one of our graduate students here at UCI is the president of the Apache Foundation. So I was planning to have a little conversation.
Oh, you have it in. Okay.
I'm not on this thesis committee, but I could volunteer myself to be.
Someone was IMing me that they don't want to see a metaverse, that they don't want all the virtual worlds connected. I think that person does World of Warcraft, which I doubt would join a metaverse. You have any comments about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is not an... that's a perfectly valid, that's a personally valid comment. I don't take that comment, as something negative. I think that's absolutely critical too. And so there will be the need for walled garden worlds, and you see that on the web too. The web has the mechanisms for connectivity, but it also, if you want, you don't connect to anything, and you don't let anything connect to you. And you have a walled garden kind of model, and that's exactly the same thing here. You have the possibility of having these links and the free flow of agents between the worlds, but you can prevent them from happening too. That's absolutely part of the model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just part of the big picture. I think you can have it, you can not have it.
Yeah.
Prospero makes the comment, though, we don't remember that the ones that got walled up, though. Right.
I mean, that's a decision. I mean, there are websites out there that are walled gardens, and you can only get in with a login that is specific to that website. In fact, I claim that most websites are walled gardens these days. But that's absolutely. So first we have to have this general model and the mechanisms to support it, and then we have a layer of access control that secures the whole thing.
You have any other questions, y'all? Sure. Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah, so I mean, I would expect just a very healthy mix of things. I mean, there's definitely the need for organizations to share things. For example, universities, right? I mean, in university, it's pretty clear that universities cannot be walled gardens. It's just that it doesn't work in the model of universities. But there are other parts that, in other situations where you actually want a walled garden. You want some, maybe there's some game that you want to do that you really don't want to connect to anything else. And if you can get people to sign up because your game is so good that people are willing to just sign up for you without being interoperable, that's fine too. That's great.
Mm-hmm. Or secure training or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. All that stuff needs to happen too.
Yeah, George is on there. Banks, corporations.
Yes, absolutely.
Eagle Effects. You have a Hypergrid team. Great, so if any of y'all are interested, you could go look at that webpage and check it out. See if you want to get involved.
So if I could just give you a link for the ones who are technically more inclined. There is not a lot of documentation about the Hypergrid. It's basically the code, and then there's this page that I just typed in the URL in there, and that's as deep as it goes on the description. And then from up, on the top of that page, there are 3 links. One is to the Grida, which is the client side where I'm doing now the experiments with changing the protocol. And the other one is that other virtual world model, which is sort of the model that we are using to develop the Hypergrid. And then there's the Hypergrid team, which is this set of very enthusiastic volunteers that just formed this Hypergrid team, and they're doing lots of interesting activities.
So, Prospero's comment, can you get hired to work on this? Is this research at universities? How is this structured?
So this is happening within OpenSIM, and OpenSIM is a very strange, confusing development process that many people may not be very used to. But it's basically all volunteer contributions. It's really, you contribute if you are interested, and if you really enjoy contributing, then it's totally volunteer. You volunteer your time and you volunteer your brain cycles. And that will be great. And, we welcome all sorts of contributions, from code patches to documentation to activities, anything. So there's no centralized, even though I'm sort of the one who started this Hypergrid thing, I don't see myself as on top of anything. The Hypergrid team was formed. I didn't even know about it. I only knew about it after the fact. So it's all very sort of roots movement kind of thing.
Okay, do we have any other questions for Crista or Diva Canto?
Well, feel free to email me or to IM me. Let me write down my email address if you want to send me an email directly.
Yeah, if you want to volunteer or write code or contribute or participate, you could contact Diva or probably any of the Hypergrid team members in the audience, and be sure and check out those links. You can go read up on it and see if it's something you're interested in. If there aren't any more questions, we'll go ahead and close the session today. I appreciate everyone coming. We all do. On behalf of Prospero and myself and George and Pima, thank you so much, Diva. Thank you, Crista.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. We really appreciate it. I'm looking for the schedule to see who's on tap for next week. Storm, can you help me out there? Who's on tap next week?
We got Pookie next week, Pookie Amsterdam.
Say again?
We have Pookie Amsterdam next week. I don't have a title though.
I'm looking it up. Where is it? We will have a talk next week. Join us for Relam. We'll be at 9 a.m. In this location. And we'll send out notices as to the speaker and the topic. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for coming, y'all. We really appreciate it. And I hope you learned something. So we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Crista. Yay.